This is my father, Adam Walton, and we're going to be talking about the Berlin Wall in Germany. So, how old were you when, in 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down?
Well, I was born in '66, so I was 23.
And why was it built?
Well, it was built before I was born. It was originally built by the Soviet Union. I guess by the East German government under the direction of the Soviet Union in 1961. So at the end of the Second World War, uh, the Soviet Union and the Allies rushed to liberate Berlin, and they kind of arrived at the same time. They split the city of Berlin into four different segments: one for the British, one for the French, one for the Americans, and then a big bit for the Soviet Union. And they ran those parts of Berlin as separate entities for, I guess, 16 years, from 1945 to 1961. And then in 61, without any warning, because the situation between the Soviet Union and the Allies was so tense, one morning the Soviets brought in construction materials and began to build this big concrete barrier which separated their part of Berlin from the Allies' parts of Berlin.
So, growing up, was it a big topic in the news? Like, did you hear a lot about it?
Well, certainly the Cold War was a huge topic. I mean, it was the biggest thing. Well, I guess for someone in Britain, there were two things that were the most important. One was the Cold War, the potential conflict between the Americans and the West on one side and the Soviet Union on the other, which obviously could very easily become a nuclear war. And because Britain was a base for American nuclear weapons, I believe that there were no missiles based in Britain, but there were certainly bombers, American bombers that had nuclear weapons, and obviously Britain had its own nuclear armament as well. So Britain is kind of like halfway, and Western Europe generally is halfway between the Soviet Union and Russia. So it was always viewed as being the battleground over which any potential conflict, if it ever got that bad, would be played out. So that was certainly a big deal for us. Obviously, the other big deal being in Britain was the troubles in Northern Ireland, which was a constant theme on the news. So there was far more news about Northern Ireland because there were constant bombings and that type of thing. You see those on the news all the time. But everyone knew that the enemy was the Soviet Union, and so we were very aware of that potential conflict.
Did you support the Berlin Wall, or when you were 23 when it came down, was it like a good thing or a
It was a
bad
huge
thing?
thing because, well, the Soviet Union, basically because they had this system of communism which controlled people and restricted their choices and freedoms, people wouldn't have voluntarily lived under that system because I studied economics, so I knew that economically a command, they call it a command economy. So in the West, we have the market-based economy where the government shouldn't intervene too much and people make their own decisions, and that produces the most utility and happiness for people because it's based on what people really want. In the Soviet system, it's called a planned economy as well. So everything is planned out by a central authority. So they say we're going to produce 1 billion nails and they have to be that size. And then the people who need the nails have to need nails that are that size. And so it's a really inefficient way of doing things, trying to rely on a central planned. So the economy in Russia was certainly very bad. The people didn't have a lot of food. The Russians were spending a lot of money on defense just to try and keep up with the Americans. And this is obviously Ronald Reagan's strategy. By him raising the stakes and arming the Americans much more, the Russians had to spend more and more money to try and keep up, but they didn't have an economy that was rich enough to do that. So they put more and more of their resources in a weak economy into the military, which meant that the people didn't have enough to be happy. So it meant the people in the Eastern Bloc, because it's not just the Soviet Union, it's also East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, a whole range of other countries that were conquered after World War II, or occupied, sorry. That's probably the best way of putting it. The people didn't want to be there because they could see people in the West, with nice TVs and cars and enough food to eat. So that's why they had to create this barrier to stop people coming over to West Germany. So people in East Germany were very poor. People in West Germany were actually very prosperous. The German economy recovered very well. And therefore they had to create this barrier. Otherwise all the East Germans would have gone to West Germany. I can't remember what your question was.
So do you think it's safe to say that communism was